Albert Camus begins his most famous book with a single line that still shocks today: the myth of Sisyphus. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. For Camus, philosophy was not about abstract games or academic debates or systems built to impress. It was about life and death. It was about the burning, terrifying question that lurks beneath every moment of despair. Is life worth living? Camus wrote this in the 1940s. Europe was in ruins after years of war. Fascism had torn apart entire nations. Millions had died. To speak of meaning and progress seemed like a cruel joke. Camus himself, still young, was working as a journalist in occupied France, facing censorship, scarcity, and the constant threat of death. He was surrounded by absurdity, by a world that no longer made sense. And yet, instead of running from this absurdity, Camus decided to stare it directly in the face. He called it the absurd. The absurd is not the world alone. It is not just chaos or war or death. The absurd is born in the collision between two forces: the human need for clarity, for meaning, for justice, for purpose, and the cold silence of the universe, which offers none. It is like shouting into a canyon and hearing no echo. It is like looking up at the night sky, filled with billions of stars, and realizing that none of them know your name. The absurd is not just cosmic, it is intimate. It is in the feeling you get when you wake up and ask, why get out of bed? Why keep going? It is in the routine of daily life, the repetition of work and bills and obligations, when you suddenly stop and wonder, what's the point? It is in the moment of grief, when someone you love disappears forever, and you realize the world does not pause, does not explain, does not answer. This is the confrontation Camus wants us to face, not to flee from it with easy answers, not to cover it with stories about heaven or history's inevitable progress, or even the false comfort of ideologies. Camus wants us to look at life without illusions, to accept the absurd fully. Because he says, if we do not, then there is only one other option, and that option is death. That is why he begins with suicide. Because if life has no meaning, no higher justification, then why keep living? Why not simply exit the stage? For Camus, this is the first and most serious question. All other philosophy, all other thought, is secondary. And so he begins where most philosophers end. He begins at the cliff's edge. Chapter 1. What is the absurd? Imagine a man walking through his daily life. He wakes up, makes coffee, takes the train, sits at his desk, types on a keyboard, eats lunch, returns home, sleeps, and does it all again the next day. Nothing seems wrong. And yet, one morning, something shifts. As he lifts his coffee cup, as he stares at his reflection in the train window, a thought pierces through. Why? Why this? Why anything? That moment for Camus is the beginning of philosophy. Not an abstract question, but an experience. A moment when the world suddenly feels strange, alien, disconnected. He calls it the feeling of the absurd. The absurd arises when the world, which we thought was familiar, becomes foreign, when the everyday reveals its strangeness. Think of a word you repeat again and again until it loses all meaning. Table, table, table. At first it seems solid, but soon it dissolves into sound. So too with life. The routines, the roles, the identities we rely on. One day they no longer make sense. Camus gives many examples. The weariness of routine when every day feels like a copy of the last. The realization of mortality, when we understand that no matter what we achieve, we will die. The loss of belief, when the old stories no longer convince us. It is not that the universe is cruel, it is that it is indifferent. We ask for meaning, and it gives none. We ask for justice, and it is silent. We ask for a reason, and it stares back blankly. This mismatch between our hunger for meaning and the universe's refusal to provide it is the absurd. Camus insists, the absurd is not just in the world, and not just in us. It exists only in the relation between the two. If humans did not crave meaning, there would be no absurd. If the universe gave us meaning, there would be no absurd. But because we ask and it does not answer, the absurd is born. This realization is terrifying, yes, but it is also clarifying. Because once we see it, we can no longer lie to ourselves. We can no longer pretend that things are simple or that everything happens for a reason. Camus wants us to hold on to this clarity, not to run from it, not to hide. Because to see the absurd is to see reality. And reality, no matter how harsh, is the only place we can truly live. Chapter 2: The Temptation of Escape. When we face the absurd, the first instinct is to escape, to run back into the arms of comforting illusions. Camus identifies three main forms of escape: suicide, religion, and philosophy that pretends to explain everything. 1. Suicide. The most direct escape is physical, ending life itself. If existence has no meaning, if our suffering is pointless, then why endure? Many, in their darkest hours, have asked this question. Camus does not condemn the question. In fact, he honors it. To ask it seriously is to be alive, to face reality without masks. But his answer is sharp. Suicide is not a solution. It does not resolve the absurd. It simply erases the witness. Killing oneself does not solve the problem of life's lack of meaning. It only avoids it. The absurd remains. Only you are no longer here to confront it. Camus calls this the confession of defeat. To choose death is to admit that the confrontation was too much, that the tension between our hunger for meaning and the silence of the world was unbearable. But Camus insists we must bear it. We must not kill ourselves. We must not turn away. Second, religion. The second form of escape is metaphysical, inventing or embracing a higher meaning. This is what most religions offer: heaven, God, divine justice, a reason behind the suffering. For Camus, this too is a kind of suicide, but of a different kind. He calls it philosophical suicide, because it does not kill the body, but it kills the honesty of thought. To leap into God or into destiny is to refuse the absurd. It is to cover it with a story, to pretend that silence speaks, that chaos is order in disguise. Camus respected faith, but he could not accept it. To him, it was too easy, too final, too dishonest. It breaks the tension instead of living with it. Third, totalizing philosophy. The third form of escape is more subtle. It comes from philosophy itself. Think of the great systems that claim to explain everything. Hegel, Marx, even some forms of science. They tell us that history has a purpose, that suffering has a role, that all contradictions will be resolved. For Camus, these are beautiful illusions, but illusions nonetheless. They are intellectual myths, not so different from religion. They promise meaning, but at the cost of truth. Camus insists again. To accept such systems is to commit philosophical suicide. It is to betray the absurd, living without escape. So what remains if we refuse both physical suicide and philosophical suicide? What remains if we choose not to flee into death, or into God, or into systems that promise order? Camus says, "What remains is the most difficult and the most honest path. To live with the absurd, to hold the contradiction in our hands and not let it go." This is not resignation. It is not despair. It is defiance. To live without appeal to higher meaning, without illusions, without final answers, and still to live. Camus calls this the beginning of revolt. Not revolt in the sense of overthrowing governments or fighting wars, though those may come later, but revolt in the deepest sense, a refusal to bow to the silence of the universe. To live without escape is to say, yes, life is meaningless. Yes, I will die. Yes, the world does not care, but I am still here, and I will live anyway. It is to plant your feet in the void and refuse to fall. It is to look at the night sky, silent and indifferent, and smile. Camus writes, "Living is keeping the absurd alive. Keeping it alive is above all contemplating it." In other words, to live is not to solve the absurd. It is to carry it, like a wound, like a secret, like a flame. Chapter 3, Revolt. If we cannot escape the absurd, then what remains? Camus's answer is one word, revolt. But revolt does not mean despair. It is not a cry of hopelessness, nor the bitterness of resignation. It is the opposite. Revolt means choosing to live fully in the face of the absurd, to refuse both suicide and illusions, to look at the lack of meaning and say, "I will not run. I will not hide. I will live." The spirit of revolt. To revolt is to live without appeal, to live without pretending there is a higher court of justice or a hidden purpose that will someday explain everything. Revolt means standing in the storm and refusing to kneel. It means keeping your eyes open even when the truth hurts. It is not a single act, not a one-time gesture. It is a constant stance, a daily defiance. Camus writes, "Revolt gives life its value. Spread out over the whole length of a life, it restores its majesty to that life." This is key. Revolt does not remove suffering. It does not give meaning where none exists, but it gives dignity. It gives freedom, freedom in revolt. When we live in revolt, we realize something extraordinary. We are free. If life has no inherent meaning, then nothing dictates how we must live. We are not bound by divine rules, nor by cosmic purpose. We are not pawns in a system that guarantees progress. We are free to create our own path, our own values, our own way of being. This freedom is terrifying. It is also exhilarating. It means there is no safety net, no final answer waiting to catch us. But it also means that everything is possible. In revolt, each act becomes our own. Each choice becomes real, because nothing outside of us guarantees it. Joy in revolt. Camus insists that revolt is not only struggle, it is also joy. To revolt is to taste life more intensely, precisely because it is fragile, fleeting, absurd. The awareness of death makes each moment sharper. The awareness of meaninglessness makes each choice burn brighter. There is a strange, wild joy in knowing that there is no script, no destiny, no pre-written story. Only what we make moment by moment, breath by breath. This is why Camus could write, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." Revolt is not just endurance, it is affirmation, a way of saying yes to life, even when life offers no explanation. The absurd hero emerges. From Revolt emerges a new kind of figure, not the saint, not the philosopher who explains all, not the martyr who dies for a higher cause, but the absurd hero. The absurd hero is one who lives without appeal, who embraces the absurd and still creates, still loves, still laughs. This sets the stage for Camus's most famous metaphor, the myth of Sisyphus. The condemned king who must roll his rock up the hill forever, and yet, Camus insists, can still be imagined happy. Chapter 4. The Myth of Sisyphus. At the heart of Camus's philosophy stands a story from ancient Greece, a story of punishment, futility, and, surprisingly, freedom. The story of Sisyphus, the eternal punishment. Sisyphus was a king who defied the gods, tricked death itself, and refused to submit. For his defiance, he was condemned to a terrible fate, to roll a massive stone up a mountain, only to watch it roll back down each time he reached the summit. For all eternity. No progress, no victory, no escape. Only endless repetition. The perfect symbol of futility. To the gods, this was the ultimate torture. What could be more unbearable than labor without purpose, the absurd mirror? For Camus, Sisyphus is not only a myth, he is a mirror. He represents the human condition itself. We too rise each morning, work, struggle, love, suffer, strive, only for it all to crumble, for time to erase it, for death to undo it. Our lives, like Sisyphus's labor, are not aimed at some eternal reward. They are fragile, temporary, undone in the end. This is the absurd, and Sisyphus lives it endlessly, the critical moment. But here's the twist. Camus asks us to imagine Sisyphus not only straining under the rock, but walking back down the hill after it falls. That moment of descent. That pause when he knows exactly what awaits him. The clarity of a man condemned to repeat the same meaningless task forever. What does he feel? Despair? Resentment? Camus says no. It is in that moment, when he fully knows the truth, that Sisyphus becomes free, the power of defiance. The gods gave him punishment, but they could not take away his consciousness. They could not dictate how he would respond. He cannot escape the rock. He cannot escape the mountain. But he can refuse despair. Camus writes, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy." This is revolt in its purest form, not because the task has meaning, but because he chooses to live it without illusion. Sisyphus turns punishment into defiance. He owns his rock. He owns his struggle, the symbol for us. Why must we imagine Sisyphus happy? Because if he can embrace his endless task, then so can we. We too carry rocks up mountains that never end. Our work, our relationships, our hopes. We too watch them fall apart, again and again. And yet, we continue. To live as Sisyphus lives is not to deny futility, but to embrace it. To find freedom within repetition. To find joy even in the endless climb. The final lesson. Camus gives us no heaven, no hidden meaning, no escape from the absurd. Instead, he gives us Sisyphus, not a hero who conquers, but a hero who endures. Not a figure of despair, but of defiance. Not a man broken by futility, but one who transforms futility into freedom. And so the lesson is clear. Life may be meaningless, but it is not empty. We can revolt, we can create, we can laugh, we can love, even as we roll our stone. That is enough. Embracing the rock. And so we end where Camus leaves us, with Sisyphus forever pushing his stone. But notice what has happened in this journey. At the beginning, the absurd looked like a prison, an unbearable sentence in a universe without meaning. And yet, by refusing illusion, by refusing resignation, by embracing revolt, Camus shows us a strange and liberating truth, that even if life is absurd, even if it is fleeting, even if it offers no final reward, it is still ours, the mirror of Sisyphus. We are all Sisyphus. Every day we push our rocks up the mountain. We study, we work, we love, we suffer, we lose, we begin again. The stone falls, we pick it up. The absurd man is not one who gives up, but one who accepts, and yet refuses to surrender his spirit. In that act of refusal, he becomes free. The whisper of defiance. Camus reminds us that freedom is not found in victory, but in struggle. It is not the summit that matters, but the climb. Not the illusion of eternity, but the fierce intensity of the present moment. The gods cannot own Sisyphus because he has claimed his fate. No one can own us either if we do the same. The choice we carry. We do not get to choose the rock. We do not get to choose the mountain. But we do get to choose how we live them. Do we live in despair, dragging our stone as though condemned? Or do we revolt, smiling even as we sweat and bleed, saying, "This is my life, this is my stone, and I will carry it as my own." The final image. Camus leaves us not with despair, but with a vision. A man walking down a mountain, sweaty, scarred, and yet free. The struggle itself is enough to fill a human heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, and perhaps, if we dare, one must imagine ourselves the same.